This week on To the Contrary.
First, the Pope softens rhetoric on abortion. Next, the accuracy of the data point that 1 in 5 students is sexually assaulted. Behind the headlines, this Labor Day, the challenges and triumphs of black women in labor leadership.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the Year of Mercy.
Just weeks ahead of Pope Francis's visit to America, the pontiff made what some see as a huge move on a controversial issue within the church. The Pope is authorizing priests around the world to forgive the, quote, sin of abortion, end quote, during the upcoming Holy Year of Mercy starting in December. According to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, anyone who seeks an abortion is automatically excommunicated, but the Pope says anyone who repents should be allowed back. Many priests already had that authority, but the Vatican says it's expanding the scope. Abortion rights activists applauded the Pope's more compassionate tone, but question how much lasting change would actually be affected. Some Catholics opposed to abortion say it doesn't amount to much because it doesn't change church doctrine.
So, Darlene Kennedy, will this lead to a more understanding church?
The church has always been understanding, and it's always taught of God's compassion and love. This is just an opportunity for the Pope to expound on it and allow other priests to give that forgiveness.
Bonnie, is another brilliant step by this Pope toward modernizing the Catholic Church, drawing back adherents, all without changing church doctrine.
Yeah, this isn't the first time that this has been done in the church. It didn't start with this Pope. The last year of Jubilee, they also did this as well. So I would be cautious to say that it's this Pope specifically.
Well, the Pope of Mercy, who am I to judge? Absolutely, he is so beloved in the world, in the Catholic community, and I have to speak for the Latino community. Absolutely a more understanding church.
All right, but as Francesca pointed out, no change of church doctrine. Now, we have to remember this is the same organization that moves so slowly that it was 500 years before. God, my brain is not working right now. But the man who discovered gravity was absolved for thinking that the church was
Copernicus, I believe.
No, that was math. No, but I'll think of it in a minute.
We will remember.
Viewers, write in and tell me what I'm missing. But anyway, 500 years to absolve him of saying that the Earth was not flat. So,
yes.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's true. It's true. This is about how you relate to people where they are. I mean, he speaks in those terms. Where people are, you forgive them, you hear them, who am I to judge? But the doctrine of the church, people don't expect for it to change. Anytime soon. Well, no, I mean, eventually, but not in the short term. I mean, the surveys actually are now going in the opposite direction. At some point, 54% of Catholics in America thought that he would allow priests to marry, and now only like 30-some%. This is a Pew Institute survey that just came out about Catholics in the United States. So he's understanding, but he's going to be firm in the doctrine.
Well, but to me, anyway, from afar, and observing this guy Francis is incredible, and even non-Catholics adore him. But it seems to me this is the first thing he's really done specifically for women. There was, who am I to judge on gays and lesbians, but there's been nothing really substantive in terms of, he talked about bringing women's philosophy more into the church, but he's not moving towards women as priests.
That is true, but he has talked a great deal about poverty and how we service, and those are things that do affect women, as well as men across the world. And I had just wanted to.
But there's not disagreement. I don't think anybody would disagree that the church should serve the poor. Oh. He's made more of an emphasis on it, but there are plenty of Catholics who disagree whether women should be absolved for having abortions.
Well, in his letter giving permission to the priest to do this, he speaks about how he understands that this is a very difficult decision for a woman. And, I believe in his heart, I can't speak for him, but I believe he was trying to relay that, he doesn't believe every woman who has an abortion is doing it because, she's not thought about it. And the fact that he has, made it clear that forgiveness is God's teaching, not man's teaching, and I think it's incredible. I think it's a great opportunity for the dialogue, and people have to understand that that we do have a doctrine in the Catholic Church. I'm a practicing Catholic. However, the main thing that we should all know is that forgiveness is divine, and I may be pro-life,
but excommunication isn't so divine.
No, it isn't. But that is part of the catechism.
Were they actually still to this day excommunicating women for having abortions? How often was that going on?
I guess unless the person probably acknowledged it to the church, they wouldn't have any way of knowing it.
Apparently priests have had this
right
this
in the
ability,
United States.
This ability,
some certain.
to
now it's all of them.
Yeah, but
for 11 months.
I know that there is that difference, but it's very important to see this in some context. This is a declining church here and in Europe and around the world, where people are very religious. They tend to go to the fundamentalist religion, as in South America and Central America. So this is the Pope who understands the world and is trying to make sure that his church, which almost never changes its doctrine, nevertheless remains relevant to the world in which it exists. It has become increasingly irrelevant, lost adherents, and he wants to make sure he brings them back. And I tell you, I think that this will have that effect.
So very smart, as I saw online, PR and business move, quite frankly. You have a flagging brand, not to compare the church to a brand, but seriously, you have a brand that is not selling as well as it did once. You make steps to change it.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I was in a presentation given by the Brazilians. This is a PR person that was hired by the church to do the release of the doctrine on the environment. And he's taking very strong positions on the environment. Very savvy strategy. I was really taken by it. Like, this guy is very modern. He's not only thinking about the substance, he's thinking about how to communicate the message. I have one more point about women. Remember, they had a case against the nuns in the United States?
Right.
He dropped that case.
Right,
he dropped
exactly.
That case. I think that's another example of his.
Right, the nuns were having people speak who were too liberal for the prior
yes.
pope, and they were about to have their order removed. Yes. Your thoughts, because you don't see this as any big deal.
Well, I think there's a significant difference between saying that, as a Catholic or, as a Christian, abortion is wrong, and saying, however, we're not going to excommunicate you if you've had one, you feel bad about it, and you want to be a part of the church. And so I do think that part is significant. It's a significant step to say that God is mercy, God is love, and we're going to bring you back into the fold if you feel bad and that's what you want.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie or Bay. From the Vatican to college campuses.
A new study casts doubt on the oft-repeated statistic that 1 in 5 women is sexually assaulted on campus. The survey, conducted by the University of Kentucky, concludes a much lower 1 in 20 students is assaulted. The 1 in 5 number has been found at different schools, most recently in a year-old Rutgers University survey. Fewer than a third of students responded to the voluntary Rutgers survey. Critics say that led to self-selection because students who had been assaulted were more likely to respond. The Kentucky survey required all students to respond. Critics also say the Rutgers survey used expansive definitions of what constitutes assault, further inflating the figure. Instead, the Kentucky survey sticks strictly to the legal definition of sexual assault. The 1 in 5 statistic applies to undergraduate women, while the 1 in 20 statistic is for the student body in general. But researchers say there's reason to believe it remains valid with undergraduate women as well, because earlier surveys using similar methods produce similar results.
So conservatives have been saying for quite a while now that campus sexual assault is overblown. And let us say that whether it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 20, anything more than 1 in 0 is, or 0 in 1 is too much. And so, but is this the study that now shows us out this week that conservatives have been right all along.
Well, the problem with these studies and a lot of times with polls and surveys is that there's always something that's, a measure that's going to be wrong in them. In the one that they were talking about at Kentucky, everyone had to take it. But that doesn't mean that everybody was necessarily truthful. Being sexually assaulted is something that you might not want, people to know even on a survey like that. So the number could still be higher. But I've always thought, personally, just in my experiences in college, that the 1 in 5 number was a little bit higher than I would have thought it would be just talking to my friends, people who I feel would have told me something like that. I certainly never met anyone that many people who were sexually assaulted.
Well, we've discussed this many times on this program, including last week in a different context, but just kids going back to school. And I have always thought, my girlfriends and I were very honest with each other in college. There was nothing like 1 in 5 women getting assaulted that they talked about at the time. Certainly not campus. Now, I did know, growing up in New York City, women who were assaulted on the subways, in the streets at night, in dark neighborhoods, what have you, but not so much connected with university life. And so I've been looking to find out why the huge difference. Is it cultural or is it faulty surveys?
It's sex. And the issue is highly definitional. Here's where the federal government could be helpful: to gather a group of university representatives so that when we survey, we're talking about the same thing. The real difference between these studies is how broad you want to frame the issue. Now, you can argue that it's very important to frame it broadly, but at the same time, if you want to particularly do what they're doing, and almost 140 institutions are now under investigation, you ought to have a definition that, even if controversial, is one that is objectively arrived at. And that's why this disparity in studies cannot go on and why the federal government needs to be helpful.
All right, but remember, the White House quoted the Rutgers study. I mean, was that sloppy?
Well, that was the standing study until
research?
These new studies came out. And it's not because they did it, it's because they were taking this amalgam of research as well. Since they were using it, it falls on them, since they're the enforcement agency, to straighten out this mess.
As a mother of a 16-year-old who's ready to go to college in a couple of years, this is totally alarming, absolutely alarming. And I'm with you. I in the sense that the number seems it's proportionate. But even the Kentucky survey, let's agree the Kentucky survey, don't write everybody's survey, narrowly defined. Still too many people. What is going on? What kind of culture? Because I am with you. I don't remember having that experience in college, but I have to believe that something is going on, and there's something going on, and I'm not sure what it is.
But that's been my question all along. Is it the hookup culture? Is it women? Is it male-female relationships in some way? And remember, also a large number of sexual assaults, as is in the military, are male-on-male assaults. Not as many as in the military, but certainly.
How about alcohol consumption?
Exactly.
The culture of drinking in college, and there's still drugs in college. Is that fueling this to this degree?
I mean, there's no excuse, regardless of what the parameters are, and I agree with what everyone is saying here. I mean, the drugs, the alcohol, all those things are factors. Also, just a woman not defining not knowing what to define as sexual assault, because what may be sexual assault to one person is not to another. I feel for me, anyone who does something to someone else and they didn't want it done to them, even if it's just touching me on the shoulder. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but the point is, if she or he was unwelcome, then it should not have happened. And if it did happen, then they need to report it. And it's unfortunate because a lot of young people are not reporting it. I don't know if it's shame. I don't know if it's embarrassment. I don't know if they feel if they do report it, they're not going to be believed. So those are other issues that really, really have to be addressed.
Well, Eleanor, as you pointed out, the White House has 140 institutions under its watch to see what they do, and having told them they haven't done enough to stop rape or assault on campus, what's the next step to make sure they're all really have problems of the magnitude that has been believed?
Well, Bonnie, that's why I'm putting the burden on the federal government. I mean, because law enforcement is involved in this. when you define sexual assault as broadly as you have just defined it, and understandably so. And we're not talking about penetration. We don't know whether we're talking about anal or oral sex. But we do know this, and what's more shocking to me was the figure that's being used for high school students, 1 in 4. That says to me that there's something profoundly cultural. These are the best and the brightest. Sex at an early age is apparently allowed or happens, and they bring it with them to the college campus. So I would not simply bring the universities together in some representative form. I would bring the high schools where it apparently starts.
Well, there was a huge case.
But I think
there was a huge case in New England just recently of a
St. Paul's school.
Right. Yeah. A prominent school. I mean,
and he was only convicted of minor charges.
Right. Right. And again, and what appalled me is that the defense said, well, she texted him afterwards. And that was his defense, that it really wasn't a rape because, she communicated with him. I mean, it
depends what was in that text, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But anyway, we got to move on. Behind the headlines, African American women in the workforce are largely underrepresented in leadership positions. A new book finds this is especially true even in labor unions, which are supposed to excel in diversity. Author Kimberly Freeman Brown says black women have untapped potential to lead the labor movement, but not enough opportunity.
And I don't even think that black women know the power that suggests in terms of their ability to organize and form unions so that we can have better wages, workplace safety, insulation from discrimination of all sorts and kinds.
Census Bureau data find African American women earn 64 cents for every dollar earned by white men. They hold fewer positions in fields that pay enough to support their families. Latifah Lyles, director of the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor, explains what black women face.
Women of color make up a disproportionate number of low-wage workers. So that includes minimum wage jobs and below in many cases. What we're finding in this country is that while women make up half nearly of the labor force and are graduating at even higher rates, they're still not getting an equal shot at career advancement.
Author Kimberly Freeman Brown wrote a report with the Progressive Institute for Policy Studies called And Still I Rise. It assesses the effectiveness of black women's leadership in the labor movement.
And Still I Rise is a collection of interviews with 27 black women labor leaders across the country.
Retired AFL-CIO executive Rosalind Pelez is featured in the book.
I think the book is really important, especially for women who are in unions and in the labor movement and who don't see themselves as leaders.
A survey by the Liberal Institute for Policy Studies found that while 65% of women aspire to leadership in unions, 49% believe there's still a glass ceiling preventing black women from advancing.
It surveyed nearly 500 African American women in some way connected to the labor movement. You had women who, on the one hand, in the 90 percentile, saying that they supported unionization and saw unions as very important in the workplace. For good jobs, for wages, for equal pay for equal work, for having a voice at work. What that says to me is that African American women have not given up on unions. We have steadfastly held on to the importance of building unions in this country, and now I think it's time for the labor movement to appreciate what we bring.
Union membership has declined over the years from a high in 1945. 89% of major unions have male presidents. 94% have white presidents. The Institute's study reveals the challenges, but also offers solutions to propel black women forward within unions.
Let's create a pipeline so that black women who have leadership potential can rise to positions of power within the labor movement.
The labor movement and the unions have to recruit they have to go and look for these leaders, and they don't have to look far.
Part of the reason why I wrote And Still I Rise, and part of this project, is to help women look at what are the things, the tools that they can use to overcome the obstacles that keep them from going to the next level.
Pelez believes in order for women of color to advance, labor leaders must address what she sees as the movement's failure on diversity. She has experience with how labor and social justice are connected.
The labor movement has to talk about issues that concern workers in the workplace and have to talk about issues that concern workers outside the workplace. We have to be a part of, on a daily basis, Black Lives Matter. We have to be a part of, on a daily basis, voting rights struggles. The labor unions and the labor movement really has to embrace African American women workers in a different way.
And Still I Rise recognizes there is power in number and acknowledges the value of unions for women. While there's been progress, these leaders say parity is still a long way off.
You have phenomenal women who come out of organized labor, who've been trained up in how to really organize people. So the question then becomes, will the labor movement open the doors and create the leadership opportunities for them to be able to really emerge as the leaders that they are capable of becoming?
So will it, Congresswoman Norton, and why hasn't it up to now, at least in percentages that would be somewhat close to black women's membership in the unions?
Well, I really think that this study calling out the labor itself by women within labor is going to be very useful. Let's face it, the labor movement was a major institution propelling us toward equality. Wouldn't have the '64 Civil Rights Act without it. Here we have a very fertile group, open, probably more open, all the surveys show us, to unionization than most other groups, not being tapped in part because the leadership isn't there. One of the main reasons, though, is where black women work. In low-wage industries where it is very difficult to organize. The more difficult it is, the more you need to make sure you have leadership of the kind you are trying to draw to the labor movement.
And I think, we need to, it's really about culture. It's about if these are the people that you need in order to maintain a strong union, then you have a responsibility to actively cultivate and build leadership among that community. And it has to be intentional. It cannot be, it doesn't happen to walk through that by the door. You got to do it intentionally. So I think there's a strategy here for the survival and thriving of the union movement. The book is giving it to the leadership.
Do you think the union movement has been any less or more supportive of Latinas, promoting them? I remember
Dolores.
Linda Chavez Thompson, I think AFL-CIO, and yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, the Latino community, all the low-wage workers are critical to the growth of the union. So they have done some, but they can do better.
So an interesting thing that I've noticed in covering the presidential campaign a lot recently is that the Black Lives Matter movement is paired up most of the time with unions. It's mostly supported by SEIU. A lot of them are union members. So what I've actually been seeing out there is a lot of black women out up front leading the charge, leading, the fight against a lot of these worker issues through that movement. So regardless of what you think of Black Lives Matter, I would definitely say I think that's an outlet to which they've been taking a stand more recently.
And is unionization and trying to gain leadership in unions the way for African American women to go, do you think? Or because there is, let's face it, fewer unions. The last time I saw about 13%, 11%, something like that, of workers were represented by a union in this country, way down from much higher numbers 50 years ago. But are black women just falling out of the movement because the rest of the country's falling out of the movement?
I think it's a bit of both. I'm not, very supportive of unions in that if they're not really doing anything for the workers and the big muckety-mucks on top are profiting from it. That being said, I mean, you can look at the unions and how, bringing black women into it, into more higher offices might be helpful, but also we need to focus on education and the opportunities to young black women. We talk about STEM and we talk about all these other areas that we don't have Latina, African American girls or boys for that matter getting involved. And so I think it's a combination of things.
But we also, there aren't a lot of unions in STEM fields. Maybe that's part of the
right, because it's more of an yeah. I mean, you're right. But again, that you don't need a union to get more people into STEM. You need to get people who are in those positions to start to bring people in.
But that's exactly the point I was going to make. The other point I was going to make about the unions. You have to look at the fields that the unions typically cover. If you're looking at teachers, there's a lot of women who are teachers. But some of these other fields, it goes beyond just black or Latino women. There's not a lot of women.
Cafeteria workers.
Necessarily.
Many of the the lowest paid workers in this country are where there are disproportionate numbers of black and Latino women. And yet you will find men on top. And it's because this has been a male institution. Remember when it was at its strength, it was in factories where large numbers of people could help each other to understand why unions are important. Now you've got to go into places like McDonald's.
Healthcare workers.
Healthcare workers, and they are coming along. But yes, it's hard work to organize anybody today.
Janitors.
All right. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. And by the way, everybody, I was thinking of Galileo, and he didn't have anything to do with
I thought that because
with gravity.
I was wrong.
It was.
No, I thought Galileo, and then I really was like, I'm pretty sure it's Galileo. But then if I say Galileo,